Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. Welcome to this eGov Dialogues webinar on empowering communities, where we'll be looking at how digital interventions are transforming social benefits. I'll do a quick run through of what we're going to cover in the webinar and just quickly introduce our speakers in one line at the top. And we'll have more detailed intros as each of the sessions comes up. So my name is Ameya Naik. I lead policy and advocacy at eGov. So I look at many of our partnerships with researchers, academic institutions, people who work in the policy space broadly defined. I'm joined on this webinar by my colleagues Prashanth Chandramouleeswaran, who is Associate Director looking at our public financial management work at eGov. And Vipasyana Reddy, who's the Senior Manager looking at our sanitation and waste management work at eGov. We're also delighted to welcome Kaninik Baradi from UMC, who will be speaking. Well, we'll get to that in the agenda as well. And Aishwarya Narayan from Dvara Research. So what we'll be doing today is I'll give you all a quick overview of the agenda as well as eGov Foundation. I'll then hand over to Prashanth to speak more about the Mukta scheme and how digital interventions have been improving inclusion and effectiveness there. We'll then hand over to Kaninik, who my colleague Vipasyana will introduce at that point, to speak about the Garima scheme and Shwas. We'll then hand over to Aishwarya to speak on a slightly broader frame of principles for technology for social protection. This should still leave us with about 20 minutes to half an hour for a panel discussion. I will call out maybe an opening question for the panel, which I draw from your remarks. And from there, you're welcome to respond to each other. You're welcome to respond to anything that's been said during the webinar. With that, moving into the section about eGov, we work closely with local governments, market actors, and civil society organizations. And the intent behind all of these collaborations is how do we leverage the power of technology to enhance delivery of services to citizens, and more broadly, good governance and the ways in which governments function. For today, I think we're going to be particularly focused on the aspect of delivery of benefits or DBTs. However, the range of our work is broader and looks at many kinds of public services as well. I'll get into that a bit more in a couple of slides. We are a 20, now coming up on 21-year-old organization. We were founded in 2003 by Nandan Nilekani and Srikanth Nadamani. The first trustee was Professor V. Sadagopan at IIIT Bangalore. And we were founded with the mission of leveraging software to make cities in India work better. Since then, both the geographic and the subject matter scope of the work that we've done has grown over the past 2 decades. We now see our mission as enabling transparent, equitable, and accessible public services to every citizen in the world. Our current mission actually goes beyond India, so we're looking to have an impact in multiple countries in the global south as well. And the way that we do this is that we work on creating what is today called digital public infrastructure or software platforms and building blocks, which can make it simpler and faster and cheaper to create the kinds of software systems that are needed for governance and service delivery. We work to create an enabling ecosystem that can build, develop, deploy, and use these DPI or these building blocks. So they can actually work closely with governments or service delivery partners to ensure that these platforms are in fact being implemented and used to deliver services and benefits. And we work with policymakers as well as those who advocate in turn to policymakers to see how we can advise and shape policy reforms that can work in tandem with the capabilities created by the technology in the ecosystem to bring about better results. Our flagship platform is the Digit platform, or the Digit DPI, which is an open source digital public infrastructure with reusable building blocks, as well as pre-packaged combinations of those building blocks in the form of ready-to-use solutions. This platform underpins our work across, as I said today, multiple domains. We started out largely working in urban governance, which has expanded broadly to local governance today. We've also added on work in sanitation and waste management, in public financial management, and looking at primarily health campaigns, but public health more broadly. And the advantage of taking a DPI approach to this is precisely that much of the same infrastructure and the same building block can be leveraged across many different contexts. So it's possible to get a pretty quick start, even if you're getting into a new domain. A few numbers around the impact we've had. So at this point of time, we are at over 1.1 billion public services delivered across all of the implementations. Over $1.9 billion in revenue mobilized. The footprint touches across roughly 2.6 billion citizens or residents or users of these services. Across these implementations, we worked with over 220 partners in various categories. So again, across knowledge, research, implementation, service delivery, programs, etc. And our current footprint already touches 10 countries, including India, of course. With that, let me focus in more on the topic that we're going to start the first presentation in this webinar with, for which I'll invite my colleague Prashanth to speak. I can also stop screen sharing, Prashanth, if you'd like to share some slides.
Sure, Ameya.
So Prashanth, as I mentioned at the top of the webinar, is Associate Director here at eGov Foundation. He leads our work on public financial management. And Prashanth will be speaking to us more about the Mukta scheme in Odisha and how we've been working in partnership with them. Over to you, Prashanth.
It would be helpful if screen sharing is enabled. Yeah.
There is some glitch being caused by your background, Prashanth. If you can remove that, I think I might be able to enable it for you.
Okay.
And yes, you are co-host. You should be able to share.
All right, great. Thank you. Quick check. You're able to see my screen, right?
Yes.
All right, great. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Prashanth, and I head the public financial management practice at eGov Foundation. So a lot of our work in public finance is actually to look at how can. So there's one lever of tech as an enabler, but also there's another lever as finance as an enabler. So how can finance actually lead to better services on ground, have a more robust and functional and a responsive service delivery system on ground? So that's how we forayed into the world of PFM. Today, to be more specific though, we're going to discuss the case study of Mukta, a scheme in Odisha that is actually, let me just quickly, yeah. So Mukta is the scheme that has won the Ross Prize for cities, I think last year. And this was a scheme launched in the middle of the pandemic, largely with an aim of providing employment opportunities to migrant workers who had returned to the state. Right. So this scheme looks at building climate resilient community assets and providing equitable urban development in the state, because these would still be assets or infrastructure that are for citizens. Odisha as a state in general actually has a very strong inclination towards including communities. So communities are very well empowered across the state, and they contribute to a lot of decisions around what infrastructure actually gets picked up for development. And they also play the role of contractors or supervisors in the scheme for supervising the work on all the infrastructure that is being built. And the people, the migrant workers who participate in the scheme, these largely are the beneficiaries. So they provide their time and help with the construction of the infrastructure. So you would look at communities, and wage seekers largely are women, self-help groups, transgender communities, migrant workers who've moved to cities in search of better livelihood opportunities. So these are the primary recipients or primary beneficiaries of the Mukta scheme's benefits. So how does this really tie to the world of social benefits? While largely works management or a capital infrastructure development kind of a scheme is what Mukta is, the key component here that we need to look at from a social protection lens is communities. So women self-help groups, transgender communities, they contribute to delivery of the projects under the scheme. And wage seekers are the beneficiaries in terms of them providing their time and effort to build urban infrastructure. So these city makers being the primary beneficiaries, their social benefit angle really gets captured here. Now, the primary challenge when you're trying to do a systemic reform, taking technology in benefit of social protection, systemic reforms will require us to identify the various actors who are part of the system, their contributions, their interactions with each other, and to identify where the interactions are broken or where the system has challenges, right? And unless you really solve for all the actors, the suboptimal equilibrium in the system would still exist. So we looked at Mukta scheme's pivotal problem, which was delayed payments. But why were payments getting delayed? And keep in mind that these are daily wage seekers who have to be paid at the right time in order to be able to use the funds for their everyday life. So payments were largely broken because there was a data exchange problem fundamentally. There was lack of availability on service level data and the financial data that is tied to it. In the urban local bodies, the cities, the city government, the local governments that are executing the scheme at the city level, their major concern was around visibility. Do I actually know what is happening on the 100, 200 different projects, infrastructure projects that are running in my city at any given point in time? That visibility was quite limited. And on top of that, the staff who participate or contribute to multiple such schemes execution have very limited bandwidth to be able to go through the set of processes that were part of the scheme. So there were, I think, 14, 15 hops before various approvals, verifications, and all could happen for the final bill to be in place. For the community-based organizations, the major challenge was I have to actually land up at the urban local body every day to know what is the status on payments, right? What amount is due? What is the status? Has it happened? Has it not? This ate obviously a lot into their everyday time. For the daily wage seekers, their major challenges getting paid on time, the benefits that they're eligible for, is it happening on time or not? And for the two departments, the housing and urban development department, which is where the scheme is housed and executed under, as well as the finance department, largely these were challenges around having visibility on how well the program administration is happening, and also visibility to be able to plan for cash better. So benefits could run into problems if when the bill hits, the cash position is not in a place where these bills can be covered. So we looked at it as a ecosystem of various actors, different interactions where it was broken, and came up with two key principles to sort of address these challenges. The first one is smart contracting. Smart contracting smart contracts are basically self-executing agreements. They're triggered when certain rules or conditions, let's think of it as eligibility criteria for a social protection scheme, right? Who is eligible? So when there are a set of eligibility criteria that have been set, smart contracting modules can actually read and verify if the proofs submitted are in accordance. Or in the Mukta scheme, this was largely around completion of infrastructure or the works projects. So a rainwater harvesting structure has to be built of length, breadth, height. Has it actually happened or not? If it has happened, then what? So when the predefined conditions are met, then the execution can be automatic. From there on, human intervention actually can be near zero or zero eventually, because after that, it's about creating the right bills, having the direct beneficiary transfer process done, the DBT process, or however the benefits have to be delivered. It's really about that process alone. So can we trigger fund release based on meeting certain milestones or eligibility criteria? And largely, the smart payments angle comes in when you think of using smart contracts as a way to ascertain what has to happen has happened, and to do a payment that is just in time, so that the concept around unutilized, underspent funds are also avoided, because that is also a critical challenge for finance department when it comes to benefits delivery. So overall, a combination of these two principles leads to very minimal discretionary power by actors in the system. And also, when you take away discretion automatically, because they're not focusing too much on some of these decisions, their administrative burden reduces. So the idea here is really to say, when people who need funds the most at the time they need it the most, can prompt fund disbursement happen, can prompt benefits delivery happen to the intended recipients. In this context, what Ameya mentioned about the digital public infrastructure that sort of underpins all our work in this domain. Digit social benefits delivery platform, which is called Muktasoft in the Odisha context, was developed primarily on the principles of smart contracting and smart payments. But there was a key addition here as well. Given that data exchange and observability were critical challenges to successful scheme execution, the platform actually built in a clear life cycle, a project life cycle level observability on where is the project at this point? Has the project been created? Have they added the estimate around the project? Is the contract ready for the community-based organizations to start execution of the work? Can the ULB staff go for measurement because work has been completed, or certain milestones have been completed, and can they be verified? How about attendance on ground, where wage seekers have they showed up to work? Have they contributed towards execution of the project? Billing, payments, what is that status looking like? So at any given point in time, the two major actors who need to understand this life cycle status, the Housing and Urban Development Department, as well as the community-based organizations, they're constantly in line of visibility on all the project lifecycle status. And we have integrated for the payments, we've also integrated this application or this platform with the state treasury system, through which funds are disbursed just in time. This uses our fiscal information exchange specifications and platform called iFix. So with that, now there is visibility for a finance department who otherwise would only have known when the bill hits their system. They can now plan for it better and say, 2 weeks down the line, a city in Odisha is going to finish their rainwater harvesting structure project, which costs X lakhs. And hence, I will have to have the funds ready under this particular scheme. So to be able to have observability at that level, or the converse of it, which is in city a particular project is delayed by so-and-so days. How can we actually replan our focus to accommodate this at a later stage, so that at any given point in time, the swiftness with which benefits are delivered, and also the fact that benefits are delivered 100% of the time, that is now built into this particular platform or the whole process, or into this case study, because of bringing all these actors together. A quick point around how the early signs are looking. So we've been able to reduce the time for delivery of benefits by roughly about 85%, and we'll continue working on this further. All of this has been happening while we've delivered over $75,000 worth of benefits to more than 2,000 beneficiaries under the scheme. The pilot started off in 2 cities, and I'll tell you why this is important. It's now scaled to 25. There is evidence that needs to be generated in order for people to actually pick up technology in service of social benefits very particularly. And that is what I'll sort of capture in the learning piece in the next slide. Just closing in with the fact that we also work on building capacity of stakeholders. So state capacity is a very critical aspect. And we have co-developed the Mukta Soft application with communities, with more than 400 women giving us feedback on how the system has to look, feel, behave. So which means it is already designed for scale in mind. So no technology journey or anything new is incomplete without actually reflecting on the key learnings and opportunities for others, especially in the social benefit space. See, technology is in general something that is that doesn't see very quick adoption. So it will start slow till the stakeholders or the actors in the system start seeing efficiency and efficacy in the system, and that is fine. So we'll have to really be at it, but there will be a spike once they realize or once their trust is built in the system. There will be a lot of change that we'll have to manage. So robust change management plan is very critical, especially for social benefits, because these are high focus, high visibility kind of schemes, and also have political attention to it for different reasons. So you will have to have a strong change management plan on how to facilitate a smooth shift for all the stakeholders involved. Governments really don't have to solve this problem alone. Like we worked with our colleagues at Microsafe Consulting with the 2 departments in the state. So it was a collaborative effort that led to innovation in benefits delivery in the state, and they are now reaping the rewards of it. And lastly, capacity building, a very critical aspect. This is something that when we design for social stakeholders, we have to ensure that early handholding, continuous handholding, all this really happens, because that builds confidence in the system being used. There are Didis in Odisha, the self-help group women, who tell us that, initially we were very afraid of how would we run all of this, how do we run the show on a smartphone. But today we have the same women saying that I would happily be your master trainer when you go from 25 to 115 cities in the state, right? So this is how I would sort of sum up the learnings. There are more, of course, but these are the key ones. As an opportunity for social benefits delivery, I think what I would love to do is to urge listeners today on looking at social benefits from the lens of accountability, data-driven decisions, and citizen-centric governance. So how do we look at reducing discretion in social benefits delivery? How can we use data for designing better schemes, for designing better adoption interventions for schemes itself, and look at program administration in a more holistic manner? And lastly, citizens will be the focus of such social benefit schemes. So how do we look at building public trust and confidence in governments by adopting technology to help deliver better outcomes, and also to look at it from a proactive lens and say, yeah, there are certain schemes that have benefits to be delivered, and yes, all of that will happen. But how do we look at it from a say disaster lens and say, how do we build disaster resilience to be ready for making payments or making transfers in cash or in kind when there's a natural disaster that has been predicted? So these are some of the things that are also on our minds as we think of what technology can do when applied in the social benefits context. But this was largely it, Ameya, from my end. Back to you.
Great. Thanks, Prashanth. Let me tag in Vipasyana, who will introduce some of our sanitation work and also introduce Kaninik. While she's coming on, just to say, I see a couple of questions in the Q&A box, and just to encourage people to keep adding, and to encourage panelists, if you want to take on a particular question when we get to the panel discussion, do feel free to mark it out. Vipassana, over to you.
Thank you, Ameya. Thanks a lot, Prashanth, for discussing in detail about MuktaSoft and how it's helping with the social benefits in Odisha. So another a bit of digression from there. I'm going to talk about sanitation workers today, and I'm really happy to be talking about some of the folks in the society who we deliberately not speak about enough as collectively. And also I'll first set the context by talking about sanitation workers in India in general, and also introduce Kaninik, who's been working on technologies for the benefit of sanitation workers. He'll take us through the thinking behind the design of Schwarz portal, and also touch upon the policies for sanitation workers that UMC is working on. So starting with the context of sanitation workers, right? The more I research about this topic and learn about it, the more depressing it gets, sadly, because it's about learning how a certain section of society is deliberately unheard for centuries by a larger section of the same society. Um, Low or no wages, lack of dignity, poor health conditions, you name a kind of discrimination, sanitation workers in the country would probably be facing that at any given point of time. Uh, Now, when we look at roots of this problem, right, it's quite fascinating to see how it all originated. Around 18th century, administrators have proposed drainage system and construction of public toilets to avoid general public's exposure to human waste. And around the same time, it's a good news, right? Like for us as a society. But we have also realized someone in the society has to clean these systems to keep them going and to ensure smooth operations. And the easy target at that point of time, which still continues sadly in the society, were the most vulnerable, and in most cases, the lower caste communities in the country. And most and for centuries, if we are still sitting in 21st century and we are still talking about the sanitation worker death, sanitation worker problems, right? A lot of it remains unsolved. And one of the, even though we started sanitation mission at eGov about 3 years ago, it's only about 4 months ago that I learned this from a friend in the sector, that the average life expectancy of a human in India is about 70 years, whereas average life expectancy of a sanitation worker is less than 50 years. That is crushing the lives by almost 1/3 uh, to the average. And also not like those 50 years are spent in a dignified manner. In a lot of cases, sanitation workers do not have access to any kind of wages. They just perform the duty for leftover food, which may or may not be hygienic. And in some cases, they are not even provided with that. And the personal protective equipment. In most cases, in India especially, we see sanitation workers with no equipment entering the sewage lines and performing the operations. In fact, I have been a witness to that. And when asked like why they're not, even when the government provides them the equipment, in a lot of cases they do not wear it. And when asked, there were interesting insights from the workers. Some say that it's too hot. Like in some city like let's say Tirchi, it's too hot for a sanitation worker to wear the kind of equipment that's probably designed for somebody in Germany. So and so these are just some of the examples of the plight of sanitation workers in the country. However, while the story sounds a bit gloomy, it's not all bad. the entire civil society organizations, governments are coming forward to understand in depth the problems of the sanitation workers and trying to resolve them. A whole bunch of policies, starting with Odisha, the Garima scheme, which now got institutionalized in the country as Namaste scheme, where Urban Management Center has been leading a lot of efforts on that. Um, uh, do look like a positive sign. And we're also working on seeing how the technologies can play a role in identifying the sanitation workers, in enumerating them, and ensuring that the benefits that they're entitled to through these policies are being delivered to the sanitation workers. So with that context, I would like to invite Kaninik from Urban Management Center, who's been working on Shwas portal that works on beneficiary management system and also employer management system, that brings in and the thought that went behind designing the portal and the anticipated challenges that they were looking at while designing the system. Over to you, Kaninik.
Sorry, thanks Vipasyana. I hope I'm audible now. Thanks for that introduction. Let me start us off with also a little bit more of a general discussion of the work UMC has been doing in the sanitation policy space, and then we can do a deep dive in our technology solutions, which have very much been created to enable the larger policy interventions that we have been working on. I'm trying to share my screen. Doesn't seem to be working.
On the boards, you ought to be able to screen share. But if there's a challenge, maybe you can just mail a copy to the person. Person we can put them on.
Give me a second. Let me try.
Yeah, that worked. It came up for a second.
Fine. Yeah, give me a second. Sorry, give me a second.
In the meantime, I'm quickly going to tag Prashanth back for a couple of minutes. Prashanth, there's a question in the Q&A from Gregory. I just want to say a bit about the approach to upskilling
Yeah, sure.
to trainers.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Gregory, I think one of the, and I also respond to Jack, I was just drafting my response. To Gregory's question, see, what is critical, like I mentioned, is the fact that there was co-creation that was at play from the early stages. So we're almost talking from the time the scope was finalized, walking them through the the application or the platform at a monthly level to say, here are the things that you gave us feedback last time. What do you think? By the way, this is what is coming. So by the time the technology hit the ground, it was just a matter of getting the projects on board and start execution on the platform. So the process of upscaling them was, first, you think of them as co-creators largely because they're the ones on the ground using the system, or they're the ones on the ground using technology, and they know and understand very well more than a lot of others, sometimes even us, on what is required. You can design a perfect system and it could still fail, or you could design a system that includes ground realities, and adoption rates will shock you. We had every month there were about 400 to 500 women who would be taken through this training program. So they have now become master trainers. We roughly have like a pool of about 250 women who have received formal training from us on the system, and now they are the ones who will continue advocacy on why other women should also consider this system, because after 25 cities, so there are 115 cities in the state, and be their partner in crime, for lack of a better phrase, on thinking about adoption, having questions, including their suggestions. So putting in formal feedback mechanism as well, where they can directly come to us and say, this is not working, or this is great, more of this. So those two things really help in getting their buy-in. And there's a softer angle to it also, which is, once they become or once other women see that certain members are already using it, oh, by the way, they're also training others. So there's a societal respect, which is like, I almost call them city makers, right? They contribute to how a city evolves. So there's a certain sense of respect and empowerment that they also feel from their own communities and from governments, etc. So that gives them a lot more confidence in participating in initiatives like this.
Great. Thanks, Prashanth. Folks, I think Kaninik was having some technical difficulties. We're hoping he'll rejoin. We'll just shuffle the agenda a little for now. So I'm going to invite Aishwarya and Narayan from Dvara Research to join us. Dvara, Aishwarya and her teammates have done really fascinating work on coming up with principles for any digital infrastructure that's going to work in the social protection space. I've been lucky to be read into some of that research as it was being done, and I think there's a very thoughtful and a very comprehensive framework that they've come up with. So over to you, Aishwarya. I think the idea is you can give us some of the landscape and then get to the principles themselves.
Sounds good. Let me just put up my screen. Yeah, so I mean, many of us know, right? The landscape itself is that a lot of Indian states are coming up with these quite sophisticated tech systems for delivering welfare schemes. And these tech systems really support the end-to-end delivery of benefits, right? So it's all the way from identifying the citizen, supporting their enrollment and their application, to whatever needs to be done at the back end to really push that payment through, and then all the way even until the delivery of benefits, right? Because we know that there are modules which allow, let's say, BCs or CSCs to really provide the benefit at the last mile. And then even in things like grievance redress, we are seeing these tech systems kind of come up. Now, to a large extent, these systems are really promising a lot of efficiency. They are promising a lot of cost savings and things like that. However, one thing that we feel is very important to note is that there are certain unintended risks for citizens that might manifest when we kind of transition to digital systems overall, which we know as a fact is happening all over the country. And so the concerns there are that really you're is the system prioritizing the needs of the administrator, that is the need for cost efficiency, for efficiency of time and so on, over the citizens' needs? And then, of course, there's the usual concern about the digital divide and whether digital channels are limiting social protection delivery itself. There's also the question of how people are able to kind of hold these systems accountable, because it's not the same, of course, as being able to walk into your local government office and asking somebody, hey, what's wrong? Why haven't I received my pension? And finally, just the large amounts of personal data that are now being collected as a part of these systems that might also have some bearing on how their data is used, and there are privacy concerns that kind of do come up. Now, it's in response to these 4 risks specifically that we recommend something called embedding citizen centricity in digital systems, right? And so I'll quickly skip to what I mean by that. So there are 4 attributes that we are really interested in seeing all of these tech systems come up with. Now, you might see the phrase SPODE on this slide, and that's really a slightly, I think, by now outdated terminology of what we are now referring to as DPIs. We used to call them open digital ecosystems. Now they are DPIs for the most part. And so they have to be inclusive, right? So eliminate exclusion across the delivery chain of social protection. Make sure that people are not being excluded just because we are now transitioning to digital, and ensure also that there is a re-entry loop for those who are kind of mistakenly being excluded. So that could be something as simple as saying, hey, it's not enough to have, it's not enough if it's just Aadhaar-based enrollment for a scheme, right? There should be other options also that are available. Ensure that the system is accountable. So accountable and answerable not only to beneficiaries who are the primary stakeholders, right, who are receiving the benefits, but also ultimately to the taxpayer, which means using data for monitoring of schemes, ensuring that there are requisite safeguards on an institutional level to ensure that accountability is being maintained. It also means, of course, grievance redress mechanisms, which are very, very important end-to-end in social protection delivery to make sure that citizen centricity is something which is really happening. Being responsible with citizens' personal data. So uphold their privacy, preserve the autonomy of an individual's data, and ensure that they are able to trust the system in how their data is being used, right? And finally is efficiency. And here, what I'm really prioritizing is efficiency for the citizen. So make sure that the search cost for the citizen is really as minimal as possible. And so, yes, of course, process inefficiencies are important. It is important to kind of cross those kind of administrative hurdles, but ultimately it has to be the benefit delivery experience which is being prioritized, which is being improved, right? And some ways that we can do that are things like incorporating performance data to make sure that things that don't work for citizens are kind of being changed on a regular basis. Now, so this is kind of a framework that we had come up with, and a couple of further steps of this work were that we went in to see what kind of features do we really want to see in these tech systems to make sure that each of these 4 characteristics are being to ensure that these characteristics will come through in these systems, right? And so that means let's say for the principle of inclusivity, we need multiple touch points. So there have to be offline as well as online modes through which people are able to enroll into a scheme. It means that portals that are being created have to be not just in English, but have to be in vernacular. They have to enable access to a wide range of citizens. So that means people with disabilities, people with visual impairments, and things like that. So yeah, these are some of the features that you can see on the screen. I think I have, I don't know how I am on time, Ameya.
You're good for like at least 3 or 4 minutes. So feel free
Great.
to go into more detail on this.
Great. So yeah, and then so when I come to responsibility, right, that means the presence of data protection principles, principles for preserving the privacy of people's data that's being collected. And it also means, and I think this answers one of the questions that was in the chat earlier, that when there are algorithms that are being used for decision making, for any kind of decision making in a system, those have to be explainable in some way, right? And they have to be very fit for the purpose that they are really being used for. When I come to efficiency, so ensuring that the system is quite efficient for the person, right, and not just for the administrator. That means things like ensuring that people are receiving updates and information about their entitlements. So let's say you've submitted an application, you need to be getting, let's say, SMS updates, or the portal that is provided needs to provide updates to say that the application is at XYZ status, or the payment is at XYZ status. And if it is held up or if there's an issue, also going back and communicating to the person that, hey, this is the problem and this is what needs to be done. Ensuring that proactive provision of benefits is actually something which is happening, which means that now that we have these data capabilities, now that we have these registries which are based on which benefits are being delivered, it is possible to kind of automatically graduate people into a lot of social protection schemes. So let's say someone is turning 65 years old, they are kind of automatically enrolled into a pension scheme, right? So now that we have the digital systems, it is possible to create those kind of efficiencies for the citizen. And that's really what we mean by efficiency. And finally, I'll spend some time on accountability and how that kind of might come up, right? So that might be something like ensuring there is a time frame within which services are being delivered. And again, because all these things are digital, it is kind of now possible to monitor what exactly is happening at at what dates are things, what's the amount of time that has lapsed, let's say, between an application being submitted and finally a benefit being delivered to a person. It's ensuring that the copious amounts of data that are now available within the system, that's kind of being published in some form. So performance reports on systems are available in the public domain. And we know that a lot of systems now are doing this. They have their own dashboards where they come up with numbers of, the number of beneficiaries served, the amounts that have been delivered, and so on. And of course, it's not just that, but it's also ensuring that there are some kind of provisions to ensure that accountability is goes two ways, right? So making sure that people are able to, let's say, rate the performance of one is the system, but more importantly, the last mile agents who are often the touch points for the citizen to access that digital system, right? Because it's usually for the group of people that we are talking about, usually they are interacting with these tech systems through an intermediary stakeholder, right? Which is our common service centers, our seva kendras, who form a very, very important cohort. And so ensuring that accountability flows down to those stakeholders as well is super important. Yep, I think I'll pause there.
Okay, thanks, Aishwarya. And yes, I think thank you also for sort of responding to the first of the questions we received in the process. Let me see if Kaninik has joined us again. I think
Yes.
he may need screen
Thank you
sharing
for
rights
your-
as well again, though. Request the host to do that.
Thank you for your patience. Yeah,
No
I
worries.
don't have screen sharing rights.
No worries, we're just trying to fix that.
Yeah.
You can try now.
Yeah. I hope it's loaded.
Yes.
Yep,
Okay.
you're good.
Thank you everyone for your patience. Let me just start. So today, I think it would be helpful also for me to do a little bit more of a deep dive into the work we've been doing overall in the sanitation work policy space.
Kaninik,
And
just
then-
a quick
Yeah.
request. I mean, I think the toolbars that you have open on Zoom are appearing on our screen as like
Oh,
gray blocks. You might need to minimize them.
okay. 1 second. Yeah.
Sorry, just one of those days. Back to you.
Okay. Awesome. Where was I? Yeah, talk a little bit about the work we've been doing in the policy space, and then looking at how we are using technology to fix basically implementation issues that are very specific to sanitation work, but also some things that are a lot more generic and that has already been touched upon actually in our previous conversations. So I'm representing Urban Management Center. We're a non-profit organization working for over 25 years in urban governance. And GovTech has actually very much been a core part of our work since 2008. That's because we see our role essentially as improving policy implementation, and that is something that requires technology. As Vipasyana touched upon, sanitation work is an essential service, and yet the people that are performing this work are often in really poor conditions. And just to correct you there, it's not just a problem of urban infrastructure or a problem of sewerage. This practice of mistreating people that are providing waste related services goes back to pit toilets, it goes back to pit latrines, and it's been happening in India for thousands of years. And so it's really an issue of systemic injustice that we have. But at the same time, there is an issue of occupational safety, which is that because we are so used to treating some people as if they are less than us, we get into these positions where we then don't pay attention to issue of occupational safety. There is no incentive for there to be strong enforcement systems, and then we kind of deny access to social safety nets or to financial systems that a lot of us take for granted. Garima, which was launched in 2020 in Odisha, was really a big step forward, and the state being one of the first in India, in modern India, to acknowledge that not only are there people that are performing waste related work in ways that are unsafe, but also to committing to fixing the systemic issues that are leading to that happening. And also very unique for the urban department really to take the lead in that and to say that these are our employees. It is unacceptable that they are living and working under such conditions, and that we need to take policy steps to correct for that. And Urban Management Center we were there right alongside with them, and saying, okay, we're going to help design the scheme, we're going to help implement the scheme, and we are going to make this a model that the rest of the country can take up. And as you said, through Namaste and through now our engagement with the Ministry of Social Justice and MOA nationally, this has been replicated, and we're working forward at really an unprecedented pace on solving these problems. A big issue with previous attempts, and as you might know, there is already an act called the Prevention of Manual Scavenging Act, which goes back to the 80s. It was revised in 2013 and made much more stringent. But despite this legislation being in place, implementation hasn't really worked. And the reason for that is, one, there is social and political invisibility. We are not, the people that are performing this work are not able to advocate for their rights. They're often in poverty, and they're not socially also recognized as being a part of society. But also that the nature of PEMSRA and the nature of a lot of legislation is that in some cases, if an administration even accepts that a manual scavenging death or a sanitation worker's death has happened, everyone immediately basically goes to jail. And that is just, it is ethically and morally something that maybe we can all get behind, but in practice that means that there isn't a lot of incentive for people to take that stand and to accept that responsibility. And so addressing this as an issue makes it important to look at it as a whole ecosystem and look at it of why is it that people are performing work unsafely. And again, you very briefly touched on this. Protective equipment is not appropriately designed. It is not poor. It is not appropriate quality. But also, there is no training providers in the country. There are no organizations that actually have the capacity and the skill set to train people on how to do sanitation work properly. Similarly, when a government agency goes forward and says, okay, I want to even recognize who are the sanitation workers in my city, in many cases there is no trust, so sanitation workers don't want to come forward and say they're sanitation workers. And the city also struggles to initiate that whole process. Where do you go first? How do you go and identify a group that doesn't want to be recognized as the work that they're doing? And what kind of enforcement is necessary between the state and the city, or between the city and its subcontractors, to make sure that whatever standards are being advocated for, those standards are actually being enforced. And this is where our technology intervention comes in, and we identified that there are two separate problems that need to be addressed. First of all, there is the issue of identifying workers and making sure that there are some records, and there are records at the local level where the city can take ownership of these vulnerable groups and take ownership that if these people are employed in city services, then they will be employed in a way that is, just, that is ethical, that is consistent with the standards that we all aspire to. And separately, there is a need to have a regulatory framework and a regulatory mechanism for the subcontractors that are actually directly employing these workers. In most cases, they're not direct city employees. They're employed through subcontractors, or they're employed through intermediate agencies. And those agencies are very poorly regulated. And it is, again, very challenging to regulate them because they're geographically often not linked to specific cities. They may be working over various boundaries. They may be working across urban-rural boundaries. And so it becomes really challenging to even enforce a regulatory mechanism with them. So the first tool that we've built is the beneficiary management system. These are both part of the overall Schwash ecosystem, as we call it. And like was highlighted also in the previous presentation, we have addressed a lot of the issues of, okay, we have a tool that is going to be used to survey and identify sanitation workers. How do we make sure that this tool is doing so in a way that is ethical? It is doing so in a way that a person being surveyed can understand that this is in their benefit, that they have some amount of ownership over the data, and that they are able to fix issues, they're able to fix errors, they're able to see errors. So which is why we have a very comprehensive survey workflow, which consists of an initial survey followed by a quality control check that is happening in a distributed way across city boundaries, and then a validation step where workers are approached a second time to confirm that they're interested in the scheme and that the data that has been filled is accurate. The application is multilingual, so that and the main emphasis of that is so that the surveyors that are actually collecting this data are from the communities of the sanitation workers. They are representatives at the lowest level that have interacted directly with the communities and are actually someone that the community would trust and disclose data to. And then the use of snowballing, because in many cases we kind of assume that because there is a scheme, people will be rushing in droves to come and participate in the scheme. But that is often not true, and there needs to be influencers within the community. There needs to be a leveraging of social networks to again build further trust and to get people to volunteer to be a part of a scheme. And so the use of snowballing to identify leads. If a worker has been surveyed, asking them, is there someone else that works with you? Is there someone in your family that is doing the same work? Would you be willing to share their phone number? Can we contact them with your reference and say they should also be part of the survey? That entire mechanism is really important. And then having mechanisms so that this entire process can be monitored at the district level, at the state level. And then for efficiency, using this data, make sure it is being leveraged to identify any other entitlements that workers are eligible for and converging for that. We have in Odisha alone, we have managed to converge for a few thousand health benefits and several other occupational and pension benefits because of all the data that has been collected with this mechanism. The employee management system is similar. I won't be going into as much detail, but it essentially enrolls operators that are performing sanitation related work and make sure that they're complying with all of the training certification requirements, and also makes it easier for them to keep track of all of this data and to self check whether what they're doing is correct or not. I touched a little bit upon the workflow, but this is something that we have actually identified really works well and has now become part of the whole pan-national survey of Namaste, which is a 3-step process of first conducting a field visit, then having quality control that is happening in a distributed way, which means that if data has been collected in Delhi, for instance, then the people doing quality control on that may be from Chandigarh. checking the logical correctness and completeness of the data, and then integrating that, and then validation, where there is a second check that is done by a separate person, a more senior official, or that is done by the employer of these sanitation workers, where they can confirm that yes, this person is the person that they're claiming to be, and that they are actually performing sanitation work, which also creates an opportunity for sanitation workers to raise discrepancies, to amend data later on, before, say, a final list is generated and published for the benefits. Another big innovation that we've recognized is that that hierarchies are not purely linear. There are often multiple centers of responsibility across state, district, and city lines for different parts of the process. And so recognizing the geographical restriction of a data, and then seeing relative to that who all could be responsible for different parts of it. For instance, we have seen processes where the survey is being conducted at the city level, but the validation needs to happen at the district level, or where a survey is being conducted at the city level, the QC is happening at the district level, and the validation is happening at the national level. So enabling those kinds of processes. This data is as of January, but over 20,000 workers have been surveyed as part of this in Odisha, over 60,000 workers in Tamil Nadu, and 10,000 workers nationally. A lot of that has now scaled up, and I think Tamil Nadu is reaching 100,000, and Namaste is also reaching around 50,000 workers having been surveyed. And we were really able to do this because of some strong principles that we had from day one. Knowing that this is such an important issue, knowing that we need to be agile, and that we need to be able to respond to changes as they happen, we kept the whole design and the engineering process really lean. We have had less than 1 to 2 weeks of turnaround time on most feature requests, less than 1 to 2 days of turnaround time on bugs, and so this entire feature set that I've talked about has really built up incrementally as we identify an issue, identify what the correct response to it is, and then slowly integrate that into the app and make it fuller and more complex for what we are trying to achieve. A lot of technical interventions have been enabled by all of this data. I'll just quickly touch upon them, but we advocated with the state of Odisha to increase the minimum wages for sanitation workers. And now we are using the EMS to check compliance with that, and again, in trying to check in real time whether workers are being paid what they're entitled to. The entitlement management system has been used to organize health camps and issue health cards to these workers, so that we are again making sure that if a person is performing dangerous sanitation work, then they are being monitored for any potential illnesses, occupational illnesses, and are getting treatment for those before it becomes a chronic problem. Similarly, tracking of permits, tracking of workers that are trained to perform this kind of unsafe work, and making sure that they have been given access to the correct entitlements and protective equipment for it. And also monitoring the entire training ecosystem, establishing training centers and mockups and prototypes within which workers can safely test and prepare for the kind of work they're going to be performing, and using the BMS and EMS again to make sure that we know that there are trained workers, when they have been trained, that their training is being updated, and that those trained workers are then their skills are actually being utilized, and they're being connected to the service providers that have the correct appropriate equipment to perform this work. And all of this has been enabled by a lot of other ecosystem improvements, like in making sure workers are involved in collectivization, they're involved in community representation groups, making sure that there is peer learning, that once a few workers have been trained, that they are made ambassadors for the rest of the community. And a lot of cities and parastatals have really taken the lead in then engaging these workers full time as trainers rather than just sanitation workers. And the learnings from this scheme have been replicated in Tamil Nadu very successfully, and they are also taking this very ambitious forward-looking approach. And nationally with Namaste, in only the last year, we have again moved forward move forward a lot in making a lot of these improvements nationally and scaling the beneficiary management system for a full pan-national survey across all 4,000 ULBs. Yeah, I think that's a good point for me to stop.
I think really interesting to see not just sort of the attention to detail in terms of what the experience of the individuals themselves is going to be in the scheme, but also the sort of diffusion and progression it's had across states and nationally now, which is in some sense what we always hope for with this kind of effort, is that once you demonstrate that it's working in a particular place, it will in fact get picked up and replicated as well. I had initially thought that I might try to pull 2 or 3 common themes out from the remarks, but we're marginally behind time. So I'm actually going to skip that and open up the panel discussion itself. I will actually ask the panelists to all come in on. There is a really good question that was put in the chat by Anand Menon, right? Which says there is sort of the operational level sort of metrics that you would monitor to see that the scheme is actually sort of taking off. But what beyond that? How does the data actually get fed into better decision making, better policy making? So I would invite all of the panelists to speak on that. Maybe we'll just follow the same order for simplicity. So Prashanth, Aishwarya, Kaninik, Vipasyana, if you want to jump in after that, please go ahead. And then we'll see if we have more Q&A, or I'll pose new ones as well. Prashanth, you're it.
Yeah, I mean, to Anand's question, frankly, I don't really have a full answer to that, because this is one of the struggles that a lot of development sector organizations also deal with, right? The first thing that we actually strive for is getting towards a world where the right data is available. For a lot of social benefit challenges, like delivery or the supply of social benefits, right? If you just look at it from an economic perspective, may actually be on data exchange itself. So if there is underlying data that is available to help execute schemes better, that would be a first step win. Like Aishwarya mentioned on the fact that if you have exclusion errors, how do you have a contingency plan for it? Or from our own perspective, when we think of security, privacy, etc., all these things have to come together to be able to put technology in use for social benefits delivery, and then have a single source of truth around data, use that for overseeing program administration. An ultimate goal to get to is, can I actually use data from or the level of observability that a Muktasoft brings today? Can that be used for, say, something like a government performance management, staff performance management, and how can schemes be designed better? How can schemes be executed better? How can budgets be better? All of that. So this would be a great goal or an outcome to go to. But frankly, if anyone has answers, I would love to hear their views.
Yeah, if I could come in here, I think one thing that is also really important is to be really flexible. There isn't always one right way to do some of these things. One of the biggest learnings for the entitlement convergence work that we've been doing, this precedes Garema. And it goes back to COVID, when we were really trying to work with the national government to do again some kind of entitlement convergence for street vendors nationally. And our experience was that it's really challenging to get national programs to collectively agree to share data and to give one program's beneficiaries as a data set to another program's beneficiaries. But then what we found is, okay, you don't want to do it nationally. That's fine. There are legitimate concerns of eligibility and data privacy. It can be done at the city level. And what we were able to do extensively in Surat, and now what we are doing extensively in Odisha, is the city can own this exercise. The city has all of the same data that the national government does. They can invite a CSC to the city center, and they can provide entitlement convergence directly without having to over-engineer a technical solution for the data exchange, because the CSC has all of the mechanisms. They already have financial incentives to do this. So in fact, it's a win-win for the municipality and whoever CSC vendors are there to organize a camp and do it, and it actually becomes much more manageable because you're now dealing with numbers on the order of 50 to 100 rather than hundreds of thousands. And again, that's something we leveraged in Garema, again with the BMS, then really making it easy for us at the city level. I can filter out and I can see, okay, who are the individuals that are potentially eligible for a scheme. I can get a list of their names and phone numbers, and I can make phone calls and say, hey, are you available? Can you come on so and so date in March?
If I could just jump in. So I'll take maybe the second part of Anand's question, which is, have we shifted to like actual impact measurement and not just KPI measures, right? And the answer to that is, well, no, we have not. In fact, the data measurement game within government departments today is, if any of you have tried to ever get data from a government department, you will know that it is a hellish process, right? It's very, very difficult to get any kind of understandable data from a government department. Sometimes even in cases where there are digital systems which are already in place. And the reason for that is there's not a lot of great coordination which is happening across departments, within a state government, across schemes. It's really hard for even somebody who's administering a scheme to tell you, okay, this is the exact person I need to go to get this exact type of data, right? Like in some of the administrators that we have spoken to, there are lots of data systems which are being created. For example, in the state of Kerala, we've seen like one department will have, let's say, 3 or 4 new data systems which are evolving, 1 or 2 being created every couple of years, because they are like, oh, we need to add this as well. So let's basically start from scratch and make an entirely new system. And so when you are kind of caught up in that loop, it is very hard to then move to the next stage, right? The natural next stage, which is really impact measurement, which is going to be the more, I don't think we're there yet, honestly. We are still in the phase where we're still trying to figure out the more basic data management. So while I think it's a very ambitious goal and it's a good one to have, but we're just simply not there yet.
Can I jump in here? So I agree with Aishwarya. I think we are not there yet. However, from my experience so far, I see the needle moving in a positive direction, like data being used for decision making. At least that bit is being implemented wherever there are, not everywhere where there are digital systems, but to a large extent. For example, prior to this, I was working in municipal finance space, and I could actually see how real-time monitoring of data helped Odisha improve their property tax collections by about 40% through various reforms that the decision makers at various levels had made. Even now, when we talk about sanitation worker welfare, right? One of the interesting things about open source platforms is the ability to integrate with other systems. In Odisha, for example, we are integrating with Shwas portal, and the aim is to the sanitation platform that eGov has looks at end-to-end waste management of fecal sludge in the state, and tagging each of the requests to a particular sanitation worker from the database is the end goal of this integration. And how we look at it in terms of moving the needle a little is through this process, we'll at least have a view of the sanitation worker assigned to a particular request, and if they are wearing personal protective equipment or not, if there is a proof for that or not, and to some degree ensuring safety of these workers. And also, over a period of time with the cumulative data, it can also aid in the process of payments, in the process of benefits which are associated with these workers and so on. So we are there moving the needle a little, but when it comes to the end impact goals, I don't think any of the programs are there yet. to measure the end impact goals.
Yeah, so we have about 3 or 4 minutes left. So I'm going to come in quickly on this question as well, and then invite the panelists to share about a minute's worth of final remarks. On the question of, how have we elevated how we look at impact, especially in terms of like SDG aligned indicators. There is an extensive exercise that has been carried out to do what is called SDG localization in India. And so in that sense, the indicators to some extent have been developed. The piece that I think is still missing is figuring out how, from the data that we have from systems like these, how would we arrive at some of those SDG indicators as well? And while I say I think that work is yet to be done, at the same time, when I look at schemes like Shwas, like Garima and Shwas, for instance, or Namaste more broadly, I also think that unfortunately the starting point of the bar is so low that any progress that is made will certainly have benefits in terms of not just directly the scheme objectives, but more broadly quality of life, public health, welfare, right? So while quantifying and measuring it should be done, and is an interesting puzzle to work on, we should also be okay with first order common sense indications that this is a move in the right direction. With that, let me pause. I will invite our panelists back in for closing remarks. If anyone wants to start, go ahead. Otherwise, I would suggest an order. Minute to 2 minutes each, please.
Okay, I can just go very quickly, following the order from before. See, I think what is interesting here is technology can never be the silver bullet that says tomorrow all social benefits delivery problems will be solved because technology has been put in service of this problem, right? What we really need to look at when we put technology in this space is it can enable, but it cannot substitute for policy decisions. And one of the key things that I also highlighted earlier was probably did not use the right word, but interoperability in a lot of senses. And that's what technology provides for. In social benefits, the data exchange problem, to have standardized information or a single source of truth that all actors across the system could use. Like Kaninik mentioned that there is a registry of beneficiaries with a particular department. Can there be policies around why another department can have access, even if it is regulated access on, you can only see this as a masked list, or you can only see certain columns because that is all you need. It is still fine because it solves for a lot of problems that are operational, that are cost heavy and take time. So we need to look at what are some of the simple and complicated challenges in this domain of social benefits delivery and put technology in service of that to solve for that. There will be certain complex asks and problems. These are wicked problems that require humans sitting and breaking their brains over how do we fix this. So I want to just close with look at technology to do some of the things that actually can be automated, etc. Where human intervention is required, technology need not be a replacement. It is allowing better efficiencies in the system. And that is critical because when we talk social benefits, it is about people needing a particular benefit or social protection at a particular time. And there is no humanitarian perspective that will differ from this view and say that even if it is denied, it is fine. So we have to really understand that. And one more thing is there is underlying tech or digital public infrastructure in the form of Aadhaar, identity, and payments, UPI. So think of those as foundations to build on top of when we think of social benefits delivery using technology. And again, going back to the challenge of okay, I am a beneficiary, I have money in my bank account, but how do I access it? How do I use it for what I want it for? So those are also some of the things to consider when we talk about tech on the lines of safety, security, privacy, all of that. So think of it from a humanitarian perspective as well. So technologists have to keep that in mind.
I can jump in next. So I think if there's one thing that I would want to leave the audience with, it is that we have actually made a lot. We have made a lot of ground. I would say even on things like inclusivity, um, even compared to, let's say, 5 or 6 years ago, we've done pretty well on ensuring that, there is some kind of alternate mode of access. There is like a phygital approach to accessing various kinds of digital technologies. While we've crossed a lot of those initial hurdles, there are still going to be problems going forward. And the only answer to that is to ensure that there are grievance redressal mechanisms which are in place, which support the entire functionality of the entire social protection delivery chain. Which means if I have an issue all the way from I wasn't identified, I wasn't targeted to for the scheme, or all the way until there's an issue because the business correspondent I went to is cheating me, that is also a part of the delivery chain of social protection. That is also a part of the G2P delivery chain. And so there has to be support for that kind of end-to-end grievance, right? Which means I think today very often what happens is that it's that grievance bit which is kind of left to the hands of like local administration. It's left to how systems used to be earlier, and that's fine, and that has its own benefits, right? However, when everything else is now digital and when there is visibility over everything else except the problems, right? Because the problems are being raised and then also resolved at a local level, at a gram panchayat. It does not even reach the block, the district, or the state, which means that you will never be able to resolve them. Which means, I mean, yeah, I'll just leave you with that. Grievance mechanisms need to penetrate the entire kind of administrative chain, and they need to be accessible. I think that's the fundamental thing going forward for digital systems for us to get it right, I think, with the digital systems.
Thanks, Aishwarya. Kaninik, over to you.
Yeah, I think my biggest kind of summary of this is a lot of these problems aren't new, and a lot of these problems are the same problem wearing a different hat, and so a lot of the places where we've personally seen a lot of success is where we have just been able to be agile, and where there wasn't new engineering or there wasn't like necessarily new innovation necessary. It was just necessary that there is an opportunity and we need something that works in 7 days, and that we are able to give them something in 5. And I think the biggest thing that both policymakers and that engineers, in my opinion, need to learn is that it's not either or. Technology, as Prashanth said, is not going to come in and solve all the policy problems, but policymakers cannot be expected to have 100% clarity before we start implementing technology. And that's really the key to having solutions in the time frame in which we need problems solved.
Great. Thank you so much. Vipasyana, last word.
Yeah, thanks, Ameya. Thanks, everyone. So to me, what I want to leave the room with is that digital exclusion is also a reality. And when both technologists and policymakers are working together, that's something to definitely keep in mind, to know who the end beneficiaries are, and if they would have any kind of digital identity or any kind of digital access. If not, how to bridge that gap. I think that's where we see a lot of adoption issues as well in the government. A lot of times we expect the remote locations to also have internet, to also everybody to possess a smartphone, which may or may not be the reality. So keeping that in mind and ensuring digital inclusion will work well when we are thinking about these solutions.
Great, thanks, Vipasyana. With that, I think we'll call it a day on this webinar. We also haven't gotten to all of the questions, but we're batting at about 67% answered, which is pretty solid. So thank you also to the panelists for chipping in on those. Thank you everyone in the audience who joined us and stayed with us. What I would leave the room with is that you now have about 90 minutes of evidence that committed, intelligent, passionate people are trying to address these problems. They are systemic and wicked problems, and as Kaninik said, many of them keep cropping up wearing different hats. But we're also going to keep plugging away at them, and we always look forward to more collaborators in the process. Please feel free to write to us. If you have specific questions for the panelists that they were not able to get to, again, please feel free to email us and we'll try and put you in touch. With that, thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Take care.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
You.